What's up, guys? My name is The Best Taco. Some of you might be familiar with me as one of the casters for High Res, and today I just wanted to go ahead and make a quick hunter guide for those of you that are interested in playing ADC, also known as attack damage carry, in your casuals or in your ranked games. So essentially what I want to go over is pretty much the top 5 hunters in my personal opinion and from what I've seen based off of competitive play and the division of rank that I tend to compete in. For what I think will work best for casuals and rank games, as well as just some general overview and like builds, because there's a little bit of hunter build diversity going on right now, although it might not necessarily seem like it, and this is pretty much the easiest way for me to go over things. For starters, we have Hou Yi, and also these hunters that I'm listing, I'm not doing them in any particular order. These are just like 5 really strong hunters. I think that all of them can be very viable based on your team's composition and also based off what you're facing off against. So, like I said, for starters, we're going to be kicking things off with Hou Yi. He is personally one of my favorite hunters out of the bunch. Incredibly strong. A little bit of an ability-based hunter as well as like an attack-based hunter. So for starter items, what I like to do is opt for the Bluestone Pendant. And lately we've been seeing a little bit of Boombas happening, and the reason behind this being that Hou Yi has some of the best level 1 clear in the game due to the fact that his Ricochet is incredibly strong at clearing buff camps. You don't want to take a massive amount of poke, so with that Boombas you heal right up off the buffs, and you get ahead into lane pretty much full health, and typically level 2 based off if you and your support decide to clear both the red buff and the purple buff. It's really just based on what you guys feel comfortable with. From here, you're typically going to want to build into either the Warrior Tabi or the Ninja Tabi. So I'm just going to go into this first build that I tend to lean towards the most, and it is the Warrior Tabi. So the reason behind this being that you don't have a whole lot of attack speed on Hou Yi, and most of the time you just want an early power spike, which is something that Warrior Tabi can provide you. So yeah, you just build that first off, and then you're going to typically want to add on to this by going into the Ickful. You won't be against magical hunters too often, and more often than not, it's still not worth it to buy the silver branch bow simply because you get a little bit more damage facing off against the rest of the enemy team. So all around, Ickful is typically the better value unless there's like 2 really damage like physically or 2 very magically dependent like damage gods on the enemy team, like a Soul and a Chrono, Soul Freya, that kind of stuff. So yeah, just go Warrior Tabi into the Ickful, and that's usually a good look all around. From here, you're going to want to go into... Thanks a lot, Maddie.
Anubis ADC OP!
Maddie, I'm actually trying to do this for work.
This is OP!
Thanks, Maddie.
Trust me.
I appreciate all of this right now. I'm not starting over. So, from here, you're going to want to go into an Executioner. And Executioner or Chin size can work either way. I hope Hindu doesn't get mad at me. I'm really doing this all in one take because I am awful at video editing, so I'm sorry guys for Maddie's spoiling. But yeah, the reason behind Executioner or Chin size, really this is going to be something where you're just looking at the enemy team's composition. If you see that they're building a lot of physical protection items, then you want to still lean towards Executioner, or if they're just like squishy gods in general, you want to lean towards Executioner. If you see that they're building a lot of health items, or they're a very tanky, like Guardians, Warriors on the enemy team, then you want to go into the Chin size. So, hypothetically speaking, let's say that we're going to opt for the Executioner here. So you're going to lock that one in, and now you get to come into like a little bit of a crossroads. And the reason why I say that is because, like I said, a big thing about hunters is that they are really just dependent on like scenarios. A lot of times hunter builds are really just going to vary based on like the enemy teams and what you feel most comfortable with in your playstyle, whether you're an aggressive hunter or like a passive playing hunter. Personally, if you recognize that the enemy team doesn't have a whole lot of like health or any of that kind of stuff for you to worry about, such as like the health and the big like beefy defenses, you can go ahead and build straight into the Rage. So for this instance of the build, we're going to go straight for the Rage, and then from Rage, you're just going to want to complement that and continue with the crit by adding on a Deathbringer. So already that's a really, really strong build, coming out. And then last item, you can kind of just mix it up. Because it's Hou Yi, you have the option to where if you want to go more attack speed, you can go into another pen item. And really, for this circumstance, I'm just going to say that you go with the triple crit build. And so you can just finish it off with a Wind Demon. And this is just like, if you're thinking about going against like an incredibly squishy team. Now, let's take it back a few steps, like I said. And let's say that the enemy team is like incredibly tanky or something like that. Then from the Executioner, you can also opt to build into the chin size. And the interesting aspect about this is that you get a lot of shred potential with the chin size. It's a little bit expensive having 2700 gold, but still fairly strong. From here, you want to open that up, and I would typically recommend just going into the Rage and then a Deathbringer as well. All around an incredibly strong build, works out phenomenally with Hou Yi, especially because of his Mark of the Crow, complementing his kit so well because you get so much of a shred possibility already on Hou Yi that it really just correlates pretty nicely into his kit. And so those are two very, very standard builds. One build that you can also opt for from this is, I'm going to go ahead and clear this one out, but this is probably the final build that you can look into for Hou Yi, and this one also correlates into a couple of the other hunters that I wanted to cover. So it's pretty much the same thing, where you can start off with the Boombas and the Bluestone. So it's just very safe builds for Hou Yi and these hunters. And pretty much from the Bluestone, you're going to want to move this into the Ninja Tabi. If you're feeling a little bit frisky, and as well if you got a little bit of extra gold in your pocket, or if you're just a more passive kind of playstyle hunter and you want to slow play the lane a little bit more, it's because you have a lot of farming potential going on. You want to go from the Ninja Tabi into the Transcendence. The reason behind the Ninja Tabi into the Transcendence is because you're going to want that attack speed since you're already getting the massive power spike just from completing the Transcendence. And since you're able to get away with like kind of slow playing the lane, because this isn't typically the boxing build you want to go, a lot of hunters tend to lean towards that Warrior Tabi or Ninja Tabi into Ickful build, which gives them a little bit more aggro against you early on. So this just solves a lot of that, just playing it nice and easy and safe. From the Transcendence, you're going to want to go into an Ickful yet again, and then from here, you're pretty much just going to want to build into an Executioner. And again, this is entirely enemy team like composition dependent. You kind of just have to draw your own conclusions. Most of the time, I tend to find myself leaning to build into the Executioner, and then from there you go Rage, Deathbringer. Last item is pretty much game dependent. You can build a variety of different things after you finish selling off some of these items. I also wanted to just like clarify, obviously you can't have like more than 6 items in a hunter build. You're going to typically have sold your Boombas at a certain point in time to start finishing off some of these items. So yeah, that's pretty much goes without saying. And last item here, something that people would really like to go to is you have the option for the Odysseus bow, you have the option for the pen, and yeah, you also have an option for an Aussie, but personally, it's really all up in the air. I would say that these are just some fairly core items if you're going to commit to the Executioner route. Now, let's say you don't opt for the Executioner after the Ickful, and you opt for the chin size because you find that you want to shred the enemy team. Then with the chin size, you would want to just build straight into pen and just keep the pen dream going. If they have some bracers or gods with like a sustained composition, like Terras, Raws, that kind of stuff, you want to immediately offer the Brawlers off the chins. And then from here, you can build into the Titan's Bane. And of course, like I said, last item, typically you're going to want to finish that off with an Odysseus bow. Like 9 times out of 10, you're going to want the Odie bow to end it all off with, because you're just going to have this, which is like incredibly strong. And so yeah, and the Odysseus bow would be to replace the Ickful for anybody who's curious about what I mean in that circumstance. So those are some pretty basic builds for Hou Yi, and like I mentioned, a lot of these builds are going to be overlapping. I will make sure to clarify in these other hunters that I am about to cover that these builds, like I said, they tend to overlap. So the next hunter that I want to go over is Carninos, or Carninos. I always still say him like that just for fun. But pretty much, Kern is kind of a similar story. He is an incredibly strong boxing hunter. This is somebody that you typically just want to play more aggressively. You have the option here as well to just start off with that Boom Buzz. And the Death Toll, typically it's kind of unnecessary on the Kern simply because your hunter or your support is always going to be able to help you clear out that red buff minimum just because he gets the additional damage boost if he's in melee range of a jungle camp. But for learning purposes, we're just going to go for the Boom Buzz. And this is going to kind of be the theme until something changes with Boom Buzz in the future, which I'm not sure is going to happen. But either way, for Kern, I almost always tend to lean towards Warrior Tabi into an Ickful, into the Executioner, into Chin Size, and then crit, and then crit. And the reason being for this build is that I just think that Kern is an incredibly strong boxing hunter. You can kind of get away with abusing his power spikes a little bit more. Typically, you're going to want to sell off either you're probably just going to want to sell the Ickful at some point and pick up the Fatalis on him. You can't really go wrong with building Fatalis other than the fact that it's a little bit more expensive. Also, like, this is just based off whether or not like these items aren't going to be changing sometime in the near future. Like I said, right now it's like kind of up in the air. I just might go see some changes sometimes, but Fatalis is a very strong last item on him, especially if you opt for this route. You have so much threat potential, and with the Fatalis, you'll be able to stick to them. The reason I don't recommend building Fatalis earlier, say here over the Chin Size, is because typically you're going to need a little bit more shred and power spike early on, which Fatalis can't necessarily provide, even though you get that 10 pen on top of the Executioner. Unless you're insanely far ahead and you find yourself with a massive lead, I would heavily recommend not building Fatalis in this slot and just going for the Chin Size. And that's just one of my go-to builds pretty much every single time for the Kern. And probably just, like I said, my preferred build overall for him. Another option that you have on Kern is to go the Death Toll into, or the Death Toll Boom Buzz, of course. And then pretty much the only thing you're going to be changing is Ninja Tabi into the Ickful. And here you can go either Chin Size or Executioner, again, enemy team composition dependent. For learning purposes, we're going to go straight into Executioner, straight to Chin Size, and then same exact thing, just crit, crit. We love our crit and everything with Kern. His summer stances and his first ability are just so very strong as far as everything is concerned, because you have the slow in the fourth stance of his first ability, you have the heat, the shred of protections, and as well as the lifesteal, which is another reason why you don't really need to pick up Devourer's Gauntlets or anything like that on Carninos. So that's the go-to, and again, one of the main reasons why he's so popular and prevalent in play right now is his second ability provides a lot of free poke onto some of the more popular hunters, as well as the fact that he is just incredibly strong whenever he gets into melee position. I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably seen Wowie's Quadra kill by now that happened in the SPL. That was a pretty insane moment. So I'm not saying you'll be Wowie with this build, but it'll be pretty close. It works pretty well, or at least in my experience, it's worked out really well for me. And yeah, that's the Kern go-to. The next hunter I'll be covering is going to be the Ram. Again, won't necessarily be marbles, but just another fairly strong hunter. This is a guy, though, that you don't want to worry about the Boom Buzz with. You're pretty much looking every single time for Death Toll. You're never going to want to flex him and put the Bluestone on him because, I mean, just none of his stuff procs it. There's no point for Bluestone on Ram. So like I said, you want that Death Toll, you want the boots. I prefer, personally, to go with the Health Chalice, and then 2 pots each. You're just going to want like 2 pots of this. And this will use all your gold, and it's just really nice early sustain for Ram. You get pretty much lane pressure every single time with Rom, which is another reason why he's a fairly strong hunter pick at the moment, because of his astral arrows having all 5 stacked right as the lane creeps hit. So at 30 seconds, you're pretty much fragging the wave, which is awesome. As for what boots you want to build into on Rom, this is entirely build dependent. The first build I'm going to go into is the more passive and or lane passive build, in that look at the Ninja Tabi. Whoops, that's not Ninja Tabi. That is not Ninja Tabi, but we're going to look at Ninja Tabi, and we're going to say you finish your builds into that. Next time you're going to go is into the Devourer's Gauntlet. The reason why lifesteal hasn't been so prevalent this season is because there's not much of a power spike behind Aussie or Devourer's Gauntlet. Devourers is really risky to go early on because you lose a lot of boxing potential. The other hunters, if they're picking up Ickful, can look to try and put a lot of pressure onto you in the lane. It leaves you really susceptible to jungle ganks because junglers might just want to venture over since they know that you're not going to have the damage to try and counteract them with your team. If you can play the lane passively and just be smart about your warding or just smart about your positioning in lane, I would recommend Ninja Tabi into Devos, because in the long run you're going to be a lot better off than the enemy hunter, just because Devos is an excellent item once you get the stacks online. On top of that, from Devos you're going to go straight into the and then from here you're pretty much going to almost always want to go Executioner. Whenever you build Devourer's Gauntlet, there's very few circumstances where you're going to be looking for that chins, just because if you're building Devourer's Gauntlet, you're going to assume that you're building into a crit build, because crit relies heavily on power. You're going to get that power spike from the Devos once you get those full stacks, so it kind of just all goes hand in hand. And like I said, everything kind of just comes back to the fact that all hunter builds are basically incredibly game dependent and like enemy team composition dependent. That's why so many builds tend to be situational, and that is why I am trying to just like give you guys like my best insight from personal experiences in ranked and a little bit of time that I spent being a sub for Dignitas back in the day in the hunter role, and that's kind of just my mindset on these sort of things. I'm mostly somebody who looks to try and make things work in like ranked and casuals more so than the competitive edge. But anyway, back on track. You're going to want to build that into a Rage once you finish the Executioner. And then from Rage, you're going to want to go into the Deathbringer. If you sell the Ickful, you can sell the Ickful for either a Chin Size, an Odibo, or any of these pen items. Believe it or not, Titan's Bane isn't the worst thing in the world to go with Executioner. I know so many people are going to get on me and be like, oh, but the passives counteract each other. Yeah, that's true, but the reason why you see professionals sometimes pick up the Titan's Bane along with the Executioner is because even though the passives directly counteract each other when it comes to God Shred for the enemy team, Titan's Bane provides you with a ton of like objective shred, so it's still fairly viable even if the Executioner isn't as effective. Having the Executioner Titans when you're trying to kill somebody, it still works out when you're trying to kill objectives, and so that's the mindset behind it. But typically you're good to go with any of those items. You could even throw in a Fatalis. It's entirely whatever floats your boat if it gets to that late game stage and you're not really feeling the Ickful too much anymore. So that's just build number 1 for Rom. That's one of the more popular builds on Rom. And now we're going to take things back a little bit. We're going to leave the Ninja Tabi. Actually, we're going to leave everything except for one item in particular. And this is the Ataraxia build that some of you might be a little bit familiar with. The Ninja Tabi into Transcendence. This is not a super popular build on ROM, and I don't really recommend this too highly unless you're a little bit more experienced with ROM, simply because of the fact that this is a little bit higher skill base as far as ROM is concerned. You need to be a lot more on point with your positioning so you don't get punished early on for this. And this is also just something that you're looking for, kind of just landing your abilities on. The Transcendence really makes your ultimate wreck people, so it's pretty intense if you can get this to work. You can also replace this Executioner here if you're not feeling the crit build. The reason why I let the crit in for this instance is because crit goes really well with power. If there's one thing that Transcendence gives, it's a lot of power, so that's one reason why this is a pretty okay build. And in my personal opinion, it's just not the most recommended build. Most of the time, you're not going to really need to go Ninja Taba into Transcendence, but you can feel free to try it out. It's still pretty fun. Like I said, the build can still deal a decent bit of damage. It's just my least recommended build for Ram. But let's say you switch out the Executioner, you can have the Shin size right there. And then instead of a Rage, we're actually going to throw on some pen items. And again, this is something where you're like looking to frag via your ultimate for the most part. Or you're just trying to destroy some really tanky soul laners, supports, whatever you want to go for that's just like able to eat a ton of damage. This will help you erase some of that. And then last item here, you're almost always going to want to have the Odysseus bow or the Fatalis. Just Fatalis if you want a little bit more appeal potential, Odysseus if you want a little bit more poke potential. And that's the mindset behind this build. So those are the two stacking builds you can look at for Ram. Like I said, heavily recommend the Devourer's Gauntlet one over the Transcendence. But the final build that I want to show you guys for Ram is same thing. We're going to go Death's Toll, but it's the same one that I've shown you for all the Hunters. Warrior Tabi into the Ickful, into the Executioner, and then again from here it is entirely enemy team composition dependent. Most of the time I find myself building into the Chin size and then finishing that off with some crit. And that's just a build that I've really been feeling lately. But you can also, like I said, feel free to just go Rage over the Chin size, Deathbringer in place of the Rage, and then here you can build a pen item such as a Brawlers, or you can have a Fatalis, or even a third crit item if you want to run it like 3-way crit. Depends on what you think you can get away with. So that's just some standard builds for Ram. And like I said, he's a very viable ADC right now because he's such a hyper carry if he makes it into that mid to late game stage. And he's not super punishable early on. He's got an ultimate that can buy him a lot of time if he gets ganked. But you do need to be much more careful about your positioning when you are playing Ram, because you never want to get caught out in a bad spot with your rollout. So, fourth hunter I want to go over is another one of my favorites, Jing Wei. She's a lot of fun. This is probably the safest god right now out of the 5 gods that I'm going to go over today. And the reason I say that is because she just has so many ways to escape. She has her knock up with her dash that extends it. That gives her additional, like, she's got the movement speed with her dash. And then on top of that, her ultimate is probably one of the best ultimates in the game as far as escaping is concerned. You can't ever really be in a bad position if your ultimate's available on Jing Wei. Granted, that doesn't mean you play like a complete degenerate all the time, but you can still get away with a lot on Jing Wei, which is pretty cool. So what I will almost always do is start the Death Toll into, and she has a very similar build to Ram in that it will typically tend to lean towards the Ninja Tabi. You can get away with going Devourer's Gauntlet almost every single time on her just because she's so safe to play, so it's incredibly hard for the enemy team to try and pressure you. And she just works so well with Devos because her second ability already has that built-in crit chance. So because of this, if you have your Devos here, you're going to want to typically rush into the Ickful and then go from that straight into the Executioner, right into crit. Almost every single time. She is just so incredibly strong with this kind of a build. You almost always can't go wrong with it. So this is just a very, very safe standard build for Jing Wei that works out incredibly well. And you can typically sell this Ickful for like a Fatalis just because she no longer has the Fatalis effect on her dash for her in-hands, but it's still fairly useful. It makes her feel like she used to before she was nerfed a little bit in that regard, and that's always just a fun time. So we've got this pretty standard build for Jing Wei. The other build is one that you guys are probably pretty familiar with by now, in that it's the standard Warrior Tabi into the Ickful, into the Executioner, into the Chins, and then some crit. Now Jing Wei is interesting in that she's one of the few hunters where you can be a-okay going triple crit. Most of the time you can't get away with it in game just because a lot of hunters don't get as much shred potential out of it. But with Jing Wei, since she has it built, since she has crit percent chance built into her kit already with her second ability, you can typically get rid of this Ickful for an item such as the Wind Demon is probably what I would recommend the most. You can also go Malice if you have a lot of extra gold in hand, things like that. But triple crit, definitely not a bad idea on her. Those two builds are probably the best builds for Jing Wei, just because, like I said, she's so incredibly safe and she just has so much shred potential that they tend to work out almost every single time on her. Next thing I want to do is go over the last and final god, which is actually going to be Medusa. And if I can find her in the god select screen, I don't know my alphabet. For Medusa, you're almost always going to want to go Bluestone into boots. Now, I know some of you have seen a couple of pro players starting with that T1 Morningstar item because they like that 10 physical power. Personally, unless you feel really confident in yourself as a hunter player and really confident in your positioning, I would recommend just going for the boots build, just because it's a little bit safer. You get a little bit more sustain early on because you can build more pots. So you can go with like 3 pots each, like 3 health pots, or just get the Chalice of Healing and maybe like 2 multi-pots, or just the Chalice of Healing and 2 mana pots. Either way, you can't really go wrong with that. And like I said, this is just my preferred method for Medusa. So from boots, you're always going to want to go Warrior Tabai on Medusa, because she is so ability dependent as far as hunters in these 5 that I'm telling you guys about are concerned. Out of Hou Yi, Kurninos, Ram, and Jing Wei, Medusa is the only hunter that we've seen a lot of in competitive play that will pretty much always rely on this Warrior Tabai. She needs that early power spike. Ninja Tabai doesn't really affect her in the same way that Warrior Tabai does, just because you want the power for your abilities. After this, you're going to typically want to go into a Transcendence. Transcendence because you get a lot of mana, which gives you a ton of sustain in the lane, plus it gives you so much damage on your first ability that it's just such a strong item, you can't really ever go wrong with it. From here, you're going to want to go into the Ickful, and now we're back to the same flexibility options. This is, again, pretty much enemy team composition dependent, where you can go Executioner straight into crit if you think that you don't need to worry about them having a whole lot of health and you just want a lot of power and shred potential. There's this. If you're having issues with the enemy team being really beefy, then just swap out that Executioner for Chin Size. No problem. And you're going to swap this out for a pen item, typically Titans or Brawlers. Depends on if they have Brace or Sustain or anything. We'll just put the Brawlers here first, and then we'll throw the Titans here next. That's a pretty safe build for Medusa. You can sell the Ickful for a Fatalis late game. I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend going Fatalis into Chin Size, just because if you have the Transcendence, that kind of a build can get incredibly expensive. So keep in mind that Fatalis costs just as much as Transcendence. 2,600 gold is definitely a lot for a hunter, especially when you've got like 3 items all leaning in that direction. So those are 2 pretty interchangeable builds that are both with the same concept in this Transcendence stacking for Medusa. And we're just going to start over a little bit. For the final build I want to show you guys is a pretty one, again, the one that you're really accustomed to, is the Ickful into the Exe, into the Chins, crit. Or, like I said, team dependent. You can have the Warrior Tabai to the Ickful, to the Chins, to 10. Probably a Titan's Bane, because you're going to want something a little bit cheaper. Unless the enemy team has a ton of sustain, then you're going to want to go for the Brawlers here instead. And then you're going to want to go for another pen item, whichever one of these 2 you didn't build, Titans or Brawlers. And if they don't have sustain and you already have a Titans, feel free to build Crusher. By all means, feel free to build Crusher. Crusher is always an okay item if the enemy team doesn't have any sustain or stuff like that to worry about. But usually Brawlers is the right choice here. And then you're going to last item that with a Fatalis. relatively safe build for Medusa, and not crazy expensive. Gives you the right kind of power spikes that you're looking for as far as shredding tanks is concerned. And finally, the last thing I want to stress to you guys is when it comes to hunter builds, and out of these 500s that I listed, Hou Yi, Kernanos, Ram, Jing Wei, and Medusa. The biggest takeaway for you guys that are just interested in playing hunters and casuals and ranked is that pretty much every single hunter build is situational. The ones that I listed are typically just based entirely off of passive or aggressive playstyle, as well as your team's lead in a game, your personal lead in a game, what the enemy team composition is, what the enemy team is building into. There's just all these tiny little factors that really funnel into which direction you want to take your hunters in. If you're ever confused about what you should build on a hunter and you're not really sure, the ultimate build that I can give you guys that you can never really go wrong with, unless you're playing like an ability-based hunter, you're pretty much almost always just want to go Death's Toll into a Warrior Tabi, into the Ickful, into the Executioner, into the Chinsai, and then 2 crit items to finish it off, which will typically be Rage and Deathbringer. These are basically your safest, or it's basically your safest hunter build right now. It's the build that I find the most fun with, and like I said, this is all on my perspective as a sweaty ranked nerd. I play a lot of ranked. My current ranking at the moment for the season is Diamond 1. Whoops, I don't want you guys to see my history. I have too much red on my screen. I was previously like Masters. I usually hit Masters every season since Season 2, based on the various accounts that I play on. I play on more than just one account. It's not the first time for me. This account's in like Diamond 2 because I'm just not. I'm AFK in the Brazen times, guys. But you guys get what I'm saying, right? Like I feel like I'm kind of credible, but you don't have to take my word on any of this stuff. Some SPL players might look at this and think that I'm being silly, but all around, I just wanted to give you guys a few hunter builds and what I believe to be the top 5 best hunters to play for casuals and ranked right now, based off, like I said, my what I've analyzed from competitive play and my own personal experiences in ranked. So I hope this helps you guys who are interested in trying to pick up hunter, or who are interested in just trying to, I guess, get a little bit better at the hunter role. I get a lot of questions every day on ADC stuff because people see me playing it a lot on stream, even though I usually feed my brains out, but it's still a pretty good time overall. So yeah, hope this video was at least a little bit informative. I can imagine that was a little bit sporadic and it might be a little scatterbrained. I did my best to stay as concise as possible. Feel free to shoot me any feedback you want to. My Twitter handle is @thebesttaco. And if you have any further comments or questions or concern, feel free to tweet them at me or just leave a comment on the video. And other than that, hope you people have a very beautiful day. Thanks for watching, and Smite on!